What if I told you that some of the oldest maps in existence might hold secrets about a continent supposedly undiscovered for centuries? Picture this, a hand-drawn parchment from the 1500s showing coastlines and landmasses that look unmistakably like Antarctica. But here's the catch. Official history claims Antarctica wasn't found until the early 1800s. So how could these ancient cartographers have known? This isn't just a quirk of history, it's a full-blown mystery that challenges everything we think we understand about exploration, lost civilizations, and the limits of human knowledge. Take the Piri Reis map crafted in 1513. It's not just a beautiful artifact, it's a puzzle. The map shows a landmass at the bottom of the world, with details that eerily match the coastline of Antarctica, but without its modern ice cover. Then there's the Oronteus Finaeus map from 1531, which depicts a continent split by rivers and mountains features that would be buried under miles of ice today. How did these mapmakers get it so right, so long before anyone supposedly set foot there? Were they working from even older sources, now lost to time? Or is there another explanation, one that rewrites the story of human discovery? That's exactly what we're diving into today. This isn't just about old maps, it's about the tantalizing possibility that our history books might be missing entire chapters. Were ancient explorers more advanced than we give them credit for? Did they have access to knowledge that somehow vanished? Or are these maps just coincidental, misread by modern eyes? We'll sift through the evidence, weigh the theories, and follow the trail of clues left behind by these enigmatic charts. By the time we're done, you might never look at history or maps the same way again. So let's step into the unknown and uncover the truth behind these ancient mysteries. The answers might be colder and stranger than you ever imagined. The Piri Reis map isn't just mysterious, it's a historical bombshell wrapped in parchment. When you look closely at this 500-year-old artifact, the details are startling. The southern landmass it depicts doesn't just vaguely resemble Antarctica, it aligns with the continent's actual coastline beneath the ice, a shape we only confirmed with modern sonar technology in the 20th century. But here's what makes it truly baffling. Piri Reis himself wrote that he pieced together his map from much older sources, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. Could ancient civilizations have explored Antarctica thousands of years before recorded history? Now, skeptics have a counterargument. They claim the land on the map might actually be South America, distorted by the cartographic techniques of the era. But when you compare the two, the discrepancies are hard to ignore. The Piri Reis map shows a landmass with bays, ridges, and contours that mirror Antarctica's subglacial geography, features that wouldn't be visible under miles of ice today, let alone in the 1500s. Even stranger, the map includes notes about a warm climate in this southern region, describing lush landscapes that couldn't possibly match the frozen wasteland we know. Some researchers speculate this could mean Antarctica wasn't always covered in ice, or that the mapmakers were working from knowledge passed down from a time when the continent was very different. Then there's the question of how these details survived. Piri Reis was an Ottoman admiral, not an explorer of the far south. His sources reportedly included maps captured from Spanish and Portuguese sailors, as well as even older documents from the Library of Alexandria, a treasure trove of ancient knowledge lost to fire. If those documents contained records of Antarctic exploration, they'd be gone forever. But the Piri Reis map might be a surviving echo, a faded fingerprint of forgotten voyages. Could there have been a seafaring civilization advanced enough to chart Antarctica, only to vanish without a trace? Or did some incredible stroke of luck preserve fragments of their knowledge, hidden in plain sight on a 16th century map? The answers might rewrite history. The Oronteus Finaeus map is another piece of the puzzle that defies easy explanation. Created in 1531, this intricate work doesn't just hint at Antarctica. It presents a stunningly detailed portrayal of the continent as if its ice sheets had vanished. The coastlines, mountain ranges, and even river systems match what modern scientists have uncovered using advanced subglacial mapping technology. But here's the twist: those features have been buried under ice for millions of years. So how could a cartographer from the 16th century possibly have known what lay beneath? One theory points to the existence of ancient seafaring cultures with knowledge far beyond what we've credited them for. Could there have been a civilization capable of exploring Antarctica during a warmer epoch, preserving their findings in maps that later fell into the hands of Renaissance scholars? Some researchers point to the legendary lost city of Atlantis or other advanced societies whose records may have survived in fragments. Phineas himself claimed to have drawn from multiple ancient sources, including Greek and Roman texts, which might have contained forgotten geographical insights. Then there's the more controversial angle: extraterrestrial influence. A handful of fringe theorists argue that such precision implies outside intervention, suggesting that advanced beings may have shared celestial cartography with early humans. But let's be clear, there's no concrete evidence to support this. Most mainstream historians lean toward a simpler explanation: coincidence or misinterpretation. They argue that Phineas might have been piecing together vague traveler accounts or even blending myths with half-known geography, accidentally creating something that resembles Antarctica. Yet when you lay the Oronteus Finaeus map alongside modern subglacial surveys, the similarities are hard to dismiss. The contour of Queen Maud Land, the placement of the Transantarctic Mountains, these aren't rough sketches. They're precise enough to make you wonder if someone, somewhere, had seen Antarctica in a state we can't even imagine today. Whether it was ancient explorers, a lost golden age of science, or something even more mysterious, this map forces us to reconsider just how much of our planet's history remains hidden beneath the ice and the pages of time. The Buach map throws yet another curveball into the mystery of ancient Antarctic cartography. Published in 1737 by French geographer Philippe Buach, this striking depiction shows Antarctica not as a single landmass, but as two distinct islands separated by a frozen channel. At first glance, that might seem like an educated guess. After all, European mapmakers of the time were filling in blanks with speculation. But here's where it gets weird. Modern sonar imaging reveals that beneath Antarctica's ice, the continent is indeed divided by a deep subglacial trench, matching the general layout Buach sketched nearly 3 centuries ago. How could he possibly have known? Buach himself insisted he wasn't working from pure imagination. He claimed to have based his map on earlier sources, documents from explorers, or perhaps even older, lost texts. But those sources have never been identified, leaving historians to wonder, were these records from forgotten voyages, or did they trace back to something far more ancient? The map's critics dismiss it as coincidence, arguing that Buach was simply applying theoretical geography, a popular practice at the time. They point out that his depiction of a central sea aligns with outdated scientific ideas about landmasses needing balance. Yet the precision of certain features keeps the debate alive. Then there's the conspiracy angle. Some researchers suggest the map hints at a time when Antarctica's ice cover was thinner, or even absent, allowing ancient seafarers to chart its true shape. Could Buach have stumbled upon fragments of knowledge from a pre-Ice Age civilization? Others propose a more mundane explanation. that his sources were misinterpreted accounts of South America's fragmented southern islands, distorted over centuries of copying. But even that theory struggles to explain why the map's errors align so neatly with realities we've only recently uncovered. The Buach map doesn't just blur the line between fact and speculation. It forces us to ask how much of our planet's history might still be hidden in plain sight, waiting to be decoded. The idea that ancient civilizations might have mapped Antarctica long before recorded history opens up a world of tantalizing possibilities and just as many unanswered questions. If maps like Piri Reis and Oronteus Finaeus were based on older, now lost sources who were the original cartographers, the ancient Greeks, for starters, theorized about a vast southern land they called Antarcticos, though they never claimed to have sailed there. Medieval European scholars later speculated about Terra Australis, a mythical continent balancing the globe. But what if these weren't just guesses? What if they were echoes of real exploration, fragments of knowledge passed down through generations? One compelling theory points to the Phoenicians, legendary seafarers who sailed far beyond the Mediterranean. Historical accounts suggest they circumnavigated Africa 2,000 years before Vasco da Gama, so why not venture farther south? Then there's ancient Egypt, whose advanced astronomy and mathematics might have enabled long-distance navigation. Some researchers even point to the mysterious Sea Peoples, a confederation of maritime raiders who vanished from history, as potential candidates. Could one of these cultures have reached Antarctica during a warmer climatic period, leaving behind maps that later fell into Renaissance hands? The elephant in the room, of course, is Atlantis. Plato's account of a sophisticated island civilization swallowed by the sea has fueled speculation for centuries. Could Atlantis or another advanced society have possessed the technology to chart Antarctica before its downfall? Proponents of this idea highlight similarities between Plato's descriptions and modern geological evidence of past sea level changes. But here's the catch: no tangible proof links Atlantis to Antarctic exploration. It remains a captivating what if, not a historical fact. Then there's the more controversial notion of extraterrestrial influence. A handful of theorists argue that the precision of these maps suggests knowledge beyond human capability at the time. But let's be clear, there's zero archaeological or documentary evidence to support this. Mainstream scholars dismiss it as fringe fantasy, emphasizing that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof that simply doesn't exist. So where does that leave us? With a mystery wrapped in fragments. The lack of concrete evidence for any pre-modern Antarctic expedition is glaring. No shipwrecks, no settlements, no tools, just maps that seem too accurate to ignore. Could they be the result of incredible luck, where Renaissance cartographers accidentally sketched a continent they'd never seen? Or is there another explanation, one that forces us to reconsider the limits of ancient exploration? The truth may lie somewhere between myth and history, waiting to be uncovered. The notion that Antarctica could have been mapped in an ice-free state sounds like pure fantasy, until you consider the planet's turbulent climate history. Geologists confirm that Antarctica hasn't been completely ice-free for at least 15 million years, long before humans walked the Earth. So how do we square that with maps like Oronteus Finaeus's, which show rivers and mountains now buried under miles of ice? One possibility is that these maps preserve glimpses of a much older epoch, fragments of knowledge passed down from civilizations lost to time. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Antarctica's ice sheets haven't always been static. Core samples reveal periods of partial melting, and some researchers argue that coastal areas might have been accessible as recently as 12,000 years ago, during the tail end of the last ice age. Could ancient explorers have glimpsed these exposed regions, leaving behind descriptions that later found their way onto parchment. Then there's the Piri Reis map's baffling detail of a warm southern land. Mainstream science insists Antarctica's climate hasn't supported lush landscapes since the age of dinosaurs, but fringe theorists point to anomalies like the discovery of fossilized rainforests beneath the ice. These fossils date back tens of millions of years, far too ancient for human eyes to have witnessed. Yet what if oral traditions or surviving records from warmer interludes, like the medieval warm period between the 9th and 13th centuries, somehow influenced later cartographers? It's a stretch, but not impossible. After all, Norse sagas accurately describe Viking voyages to North America centuries before Columbus, proving that premodern cultures could preserve detailed geographical knowledge across generations. Critics, though, aren't buying it. They argue that even if Antarctica's coastline shifted slightly during warmer cycles, the continent's core has been frozen solid for epochs. Any ancient maps claiming to show it ice-free would have to be based on pure myth or creative guesswork. And let's not forget the human factor. Renaissance mapmakers were notorious for filling blanks with artistic flourishes, blending real geography with legends of sea monsters and golden cities. Could the Antarctica on these old charts simply be Terra Australis, the hypothetical continent scholars had dreamed up to balance the globe? But here's the twist. Modern sonar surveys reveal submerged features that eerily align with certain ancient maps. The underwater topography of Queen Maud Land, for instance, mirrors contours on the Buach map with uncanny precision. Coincidence? Maybe, but it's the kind of coincidence that keeps researchers up at night. Whether these maps are accidental masterpieces or relics of forgotten wisdom, one thing's clear. Antarctica's icy veil hides more than just rock and snow. It guards secrets that could rewrite our understanding of history itself. Charles Hapgood's Earth-shifting theory throws a wild card into the debate over these baffling ancient maps. In the 1950s, this unassuming university professor proposed something radical, that Antarctica hadn't always been at the South Pole. His Earth crust displacement theory suggested the planet's outer shell could slide like a loose peel on an orange, shifting entire continents over millennia. According to Hapgood, Antarctica might have once sat thousands of miles farther north, enjoying a temperate climate before drifting into its current frozen exile. If true, this could explain why maps like Oronteus Finaeus's depict rivers and coastlines now buried under ice. Even Albert Einstein found the idea compelling enough to endorse Hapgood's early work, calling it of great importance to everything that is related to the history of the Earth's surface. But here's where things get thorny. Modern geology flatly rejects the notion of sudden crustal shifts on this scale. Plate tectonics, the widely accepted model, shows continents moving at barely the speed fingernails grow, not careening across the globe in human timescales. Critics argue Hapgood's theory relies on outdated science, pointing out that Antarctic ice cores reveal uninterrupted layers dating back millions of years, with no evidence of a sudden relocation. Yet Hapgood supporters counter with anomalies like ancient maps that seem to chart Antarctica's subglacial topography with eerie precision. If the continent hasn't budged, how did Renaissance cartographers capture details invisible beneath miles of ice? The debate hinges on a tantalizing what-if. Could fragments of pre-Ice Age knowledge have survived? Hapgood speculated that advanced ancient civilizations, now lost to time, might have mapped Antarctica during a warmer epoch before their records were handed down through libraries like Alexandria's. It's a romantic idea, one that dovetails with legends of Atlantis and other sunken worlds, but without physical proof, a ruin, an artifact, anything, it remains squarely in the realm of speculation. Mainstream historians offer a simpler explanation: coincidence. They argue that old maps blended myth with half-understood geography, accidentally creating shapes that resemble Antarctica. The rivers on Finius's map possibly misread accounts of South America's winding waterways, their ice-free coasts' artistic license filling blank spaces on parchment. Yet even skeptics admit the precision of certain features is unsettling. Hapgood's theory may not hold water with modern science, but it forces us to ask, if these maps aren't based on crustal shifts or ancient exploration, what other explanation could account for their uncanny accuracy? Sometimes the most compelling mysteries aren't just about finding answers, they're about questioning what we think we know. Putting ancient maps side by side with modern satellite imagery reveals a mix of jaw-dropping accuracy and head-scratching errors that keep researchers debating to this day. Take the Piri Reis map's depiction of Antarctica's Queen Maud Land. When superimposed over contemporary subglacial surveys, the coastal contours align within a margin of error that feels almost impossible for the 1500s. The curve of the shoreline, the placement of bays, even subtle indentations match up in ways that defy simple coincidence. Yet flip to another section of the same map, and you'll find landmasses stretched like taffy or misplaced by thousands of miles. So what gives? How can one part be eerily precise while another looks like a child's sketch? The answer might lie in how these maps were assembled. Renaissance cartographers weren't working from aerial photographs. They were stitching together fragments of older charts, traveler accounts, and sometimes pure speculation. Imagine trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces are missing, and you've got a sense of their challenge. When they had good source material, like detailed portolan charts from experienced sailors, the results could be shockingly accurate. But when information ran dry, they'd fill gaps with educated guesses or copy errors from earlier maps, creating those glaring inconsistencies. Modern technology lets us test these ancient maps in ways their creators never imagined. Using sonar data from ice-penetrating radar, scientists have mapped Antarctica's hidden topography, and in places like the Ross Sea, the fit with maps like Oronteus Finaeus's is unsettling. The map shows valleys and ridges that align with today's subglacial features, as if someone peeled back the ice and traced the land beneath. But here's the catch: these features aren't just buried, they've been buried for millions of years. That's why skeptics argue these matches are flukes, pointing to spots where the same maps depict phantom islands or misplace entire mountain ranges. Then there's the scale problem. Many ancient maps lack consistent scaling, with coastlines compressed or expanded based on the cartographer's priorities. A trading port might be exaggerated to the size of a continent, while less important areas shrink into obscurity. This doesn't necessarily mean the mapmakers were wrong, just that their goals differed from modern precision. They weren't creating GPS guides, they were blending navigation aids, political statements, and even mythological elements into single artworks. So where does that leave the mystery? The most compelling theory is that the accurate parts of these maps preserve slivers of genuine pre-modern exploration, perhaps from Phoenician voyages, Arab traders, or other seafarers whose records are lost. The errors, those could be the cracks where myth seeped into science, or maybe it's simpler. Even a blind squirrel finds a nut sometimes, but when you see how often these nuts land exactly where they shouldn't, it's enough to make you wonder if history's missing a few pages or an entire chapter. Ancient maps didn't just chart coastlines, they wove entire worlds where reality tangled with legend. Sea dragons coiled around uncharted waters, and phantom islands like High Brassel floated at the edges of parchment, waiting to lure sailors into myth. So when we see a landmass labeled Terra Australis, or an icy continent sketched where Antarctica should be, it's worth asking, Is this geography or storytelling? The answer might be both. For centuries, mapmakers filled blank spaces with educated guesses and fantastical details, not out of deceit, but because the unknown demanded explanation. A blank map was unthinkable, better a monster or a fabled city than empty white. But here's where Antarctica's case gets interesting. Unlike the outright fiction of, say, the Island of Demons, a 16th-century cartographic boogeyman, the southern continent's depictions often carry startling grains of accuracy. The Oronteus Finaeus maps river systems, for example, align a little too neatly with modern subglacial surveys to dismiss as pure fantasy. Could the myths have been placeholders for real, half-remembered knowledge? Consider how Norse sagas described Vinland, a verdant land west of Greenland, long dismissed as legend until archaeologists dug up a Viking settlement in Newfoundland. Stories, it turns out, can be shadows of truth stretched thin by time. Then there's the elephant in the room, Terra Australis. For over 2,000 years, scholars argued the southern hemisphere must hold a vast landmass to balance the northern continents. This wasn't just superstition, it was bad math rooted in Aristotle's belief in symmetrical geography. By the Renaissance, mapmakers like Mercator dutifully included this theoretical continent, often blending hearsay from southern voyages with pure invention. But what if some of those rumors came from real glimpses of Antarctica? Portuguese explorers reported high, white lands beyond the Cape of Good Hope, and the Zeno map of the 14th century shows a shadowy landmass labeled Estatiland near Greenland, later speculated to be a garbled account of the Americas. Could Antarctica's presence on old maps be another case of broken telephone, where fact and conjecture blurred? The line between myth and map wasn't always clear-cut. Take the Piri Reis notation describing the southern land as very hot, a baffling detail for a frozen continent. Some say this proves the map's fictional nature, but others point to medieval Arab traders' accounts of a land where rocks burn, possibly referencing Antarctic volcanoes like Mount Erebus active beneath the ice. Even mistakes can be clues. When Gerardus Mercator drew Antarctica as a ring-shaped continent in 1538, was he copying flawed sources or echoing ancient tales of a circular world like Plato's Atlantis? Perhaps the most compelling argument for truth hiding in myth comes from the Buach maps, split Antarctica. Modern science confirms the continent is divided by a subglacial trench, but Buach depicted it as two islands separated by open water. Critics call this a lucky guess, yet indigenous Australian oral traditions describe a time when the Great White Land was accessible by foot, hinting at lower sea levels during ice ages. Coincidence, maybe, but when multiple threads, maps, myths, and geology tug in the same direction, it's hard not to wonder if we're piecing together a puzzle where some fragments were never meant to fit. The real mystery isn't whether these maps are perfect, but why their brightest sparks of accuracy shine in the darkest corners of history. Skeptics have a compelling case when they argue that ancient maps like Piri Reis's might not show Antarctica at all, but rather a distorted version of South America. Look closely, and you'll notice similarities between the map's jagged coastline and the eastern edge of Brazil, twisted by the limitations of 16th-century cartography. Early mapmakers often stretched or compressed landmasses to fit their parchment, bending geography to the whims of artistic interpretation. The famous Greenland problem in medieval maps is a perfect example. The island appears comically oversized, not because explorers thought it was that big, but because they lacked precise scaling techniques. Could the same be true for the landmass on Piri Reis's map? If you rotate South America slightly and account for typical Renaissance-era distortions, the alignment becomes harder to dismiss outright. But then there's the counterpoint. The Piri Reis map includes details that don't match South America at all. The annotations describe a warm, animal-rich land completely at odds with Patagonia's rugged, windswept terrain. Even more puzzling are the mountain ranges and river valleys that align with Antarctica's subglacial features. Skeptics wave this away as coincidence, but when multiple coincidences stack up, it starts to feel like more than just chance. Take the case of the Oronteus Finaeus map. Its river systems don't correspond to any known South American geography, yet they mirror Antarctica's buried valleys with uncanny precision. Then there's the hoax theory. Some historians suggest these maps could be later forgeries, crafted to stoke fascination or fetch high prices by pretending to hold ancient secrets. The Vinland map, once hailed as proof of Viking voyages to North America, was eventually exposed as a 20th century fake thanks to modern ink analysis. Could the Piri Reis or Buach maps face similar scrutiny? Thus far, forensic studies haven't found evidence of tampering. The parchment, ink, and stylistic elements all match their claimed eras. Still, the possibility lingers, especially when profit or national pride enters the equation. Perhaps the most balanced explanation lies in the psychology of pattern recognition. Humans are wired to see faces in clouds and shapes in stars. It's called pareidolia. When modern eyes look at these old maps, are we projecting what we want to see? After all, Antarctica wasn't even a confirmed continent until the 1800s. Before that, it existed mostly as a theoretical concept, a blank canvas for cartographers to fill with imagination. The rivers on Phineus's map might just be decorative flourishes, and the coastlines could be artistic interpretations of vague sailor accounts. Yet even the staunchest skeptics admit there's a haunting gap in their logic. If these maps are pure fiction or misreadings, why do their most controversial details keep finding echoes in modern science? The debate isn't just about ink and parchment, it's about how history gets written and who gets to decide what counts as truth. Every time a new sonar scan reveals another hidden Antarctic ridge that matches an ancient map, the line between myth and reality blurs a little more. Whether these maps are misunderstood masterpieces or accidental prophecies, one thing's certain: they've turned a few dusty old charts into one of history's most enduring riddles. The Zeno map throws a wrench into the Antarctic mystery, not because of what it gets right, but because of the chaos it leaves in its wake. Created in the late 1400s but allegedly based on 14th century voyages by the Zeno brothers of Venice, this controversial chart depicts a phantom island called Friesland, complete with detailed coastlines and place names. Some proponents of alternative history have seized on it as evidence of premodern Antarctic knowledge, arguing that Friesland's shape mirrors parts of the frozen continent. But here's the problem: Friesland almost certainly doesn't exist. Most historians agree it's a mislabeled Iceland, Greenland, or even the Faroe Islands cartographic telephone gone terribly wrong. So how did this mix-up happen? The Zeno map's creator, Niccolò Zeno the Younger, claimed to have reconstructed it from his ancestors' lost travel logs. But Renaissance Europe was swimming with garbled accounts of northern voyages, where names like Friesland and Fixland blurred together. A single transcription error or mistranslation could spawn an entire imaginary land, and once it was inked onto parchment, Friesland took on a life of its own. For centuries, it appeared on maps as a real place, even confusing explorers like Martin Frobisher, who mistakenly believed he'd landed there in 1576. What makes this relevant to the Antarctica debate is the pattern it reveals. If a well-documented blunder like Friesland could persist for hundreds of years, how much of what we see on other ancient maps might be equally misleading? The Zeno map isn't just a cautionary tale, it's a masterclass in how easily myths harden into facts when they're repeated across generations of atlases. Yet even here, there's a twist. Some researchers note that Friesland's eastern coastline bears a faint resemblance to part of Antarctica's Palmer Land. Could the Zeno brothers or their sources have somehow conflated Arctic and Antarctic accounts? It's a stretch, but not impossible. The real lesson of the Zeno map isn't about proving or disproving ancient Antarctic exploration. It's about humility. These old charts are palimpsest layers of truth, error, and guesswork stacked like geological strata. Sometimes they preserve uncanny glimpses of reality. Other times they immortalize a scribe's mistake. The challenge is telling the difference and remembering that every line on parchment carries the fingerprints of human fallibility. When we stare at these maps, we're not just seeing land masses. We're seeing the messy, magnificent process of discovery itself. The age of exploration wasn't just about brave sailors and uncharted waters. It was also a high-stakes game of state secrets and closely guarded knowledge. Among Europe's seafaring powers, Portugal and Spain stood out for their obsessive secrecy, locking away maps in vaults like national treasures. The infamous Padrão Real, the master map kept under lock and key in Lisbon, was so closely protected that updating it required a royal clerk's presence. Sailors caught smuggling charts faced execution. With this level of control, it's no wonder theorists speculate. Could these archives have held fragments of Antarctic knowledge, passed down from sources even older than Columbus? Historical breadcrumbs suggest tantalizing possibilities. Take the case of Portuguese explorer Pedro Fernandes de Queiroz, who in 1606 claimed to have discovered a great southern land teeming with resources. His reports describe a place suspiciously unlike the frozen wasteland we know. Could he have been drawing on older, perhaps inaccurate accounts? Then there's the mysterious deep maps, crafted by French cartographers in the 1540s, but allegedly based on Portuguese sources. One of these, the Harleian map, shows a massive southern continent labeled Java la Grande, with coastlines that some researchers argue could be distorted interpretations of Antarctica's northern reaches. But here's where skepticism kicks in. Spanish and Portuguese archives, though meticulously preserved, contain no direct references to Antarctic exploration before the 18th century. The hidden knowledge theory relies heavily on gaps, missing logs, destroyed records from the Lisbon earthquake of 1755, and the deliberate opacity of colonial powers. Yet absence isn't proof. Critics point out that if Antarctica had truly been known, the incentive to exploit its hypothetical resources would have outweighed any reason for secrecy. Gold-hungry empires weren't known for keeping fertile lands a secret. The strongest evidence might lie in the unexpected. Spanish navigator Gabriel de Castilla's 1603 voyage reportedly cited snow-covered mountains beyond the Drake Passage, a description many believe refers to the Antarctic Peninsula. While his original log is lost, second-hand accounts from Dutch rivals mention the encounter, suggesting it wasn't pure invention. Similarly, Portuguese ships blown off course near the Cape of Good Hope occasionally recorded high white lands farther south. Were these icebergs misidentified as land or genuine glimpses of the continent? The puzzle deepens when we consider how information traveled. Arab geographers like al-Masudi wrote of a land beyond the waves where the sun barely sets, possibly echoing indigenous accounts of southern latitudes. Could such fragments have reached Iberian courts through Moorish scholars? It's not impossible after all. Columbus studied Arabic maps before his Atlantic crossing. But without a smoking gun, an undisputed pre-18th century map showing Antarctica's true shape, the theory remains in the realm of intriguing speculation. What's undeniable is this: The same empires that meticulously documented every palm tree in the Caribbean left curiously vague hints about the far south. Whether those hints point to lost knowledge or simply the limits of their exploration, we may never know for sure, but the possibility lingers like fog on a medieval map, just thick enough to hide what might or might not be there. Gerardus Mercator's world map of 1538 is a masterpiece of Renaissance cartography, but it's also one of history's most enduring geographical puzzles. Right there at the bottom, taking up nearly a quarter of the page, sits a massive landmass labeled Terra Australis. Unlike the fragmented or distorted versions on other maps, Mercator's southern continent is oddly symmetrical, almost like a geometric placeholder. So how did this legendary mapmaker, the same man whose projection system still guides navigation today, end up depicting a continent no European had ever seen? The answer might lie in the collision of ancient scholarship and Renaissance ambition. Mercator was no reckless guesser. His maps were painstakingly researched, blending the latest explorer accounts with classical texts from Ptolemy and Marco Polo. But here's the twist. He openly admitted that his Terra Australis was speculative, a theoretical landmass required to balance the northern continents according to Aristotelian cosmology. Scholars of his era were convinced the Earth's landmasses needed symmetry, a belief so entrenched that maps without a southern continent were considered incomplete. Yet buried in Mercator's notes are hints that he might have had access to darker, older sources. In a letter to colleague John D., he referenced certain mariners' charts showing a southern land beyond the Cape of Good Hope, though he never revealed their origin. Could these have been relics of lost Portuguese voyages, or even copies of ancient Alexandrian maps salvaged from some forgotten library? Then there's the shape of Mercator's Terra Australis itself. While most of it is clearly fictional, one segment near the bottom right bears a curious resemblance to Antarctica's Queen Maud Land. The coastline bends at angles that align loosely with modern subglacial surveys, close enough to raise eyebrows, but not enough to dismiss as pure coincidence. Skeptics argue this similarity is accidental, pointing out that Mercator's continent is crisscrossed with rivers and mountain ranges that Antarctica simply doesn't have. But supporters of the ancient knowledge theory counter with an intriguing possibility. What if Mercator was working from multiple sources, some accurate and others wildly imaginary, blending them into a single flawed masterpiece? The strongest evidence against Mercator knowing about Antarctica comes from his own writings. In his atlas, he describes Terra Australis as fertile and pleasant, a stark contrast to the frozen desert we know. This suggests he was echoing myths like the Land of Parrots, reported by Portuguese sailors, likely misidentified patches of South America or Australia. Yet even here, there's a tantalizing thread. Medieval Arab geographers like Al-Idrisi wrote of a southern land where the sun's heat is mild, and Norse sagas mention Vita Manaland, white man's land beyond the ice. Could fragments of these accounts have reached Mercator, woven into his work alongside the pure speculation? What makes Mercator's case so fascinating isn't just the map itself, it's what happened next. For over 2 centuries, explorers from Cook to Shackleton would chase the ghost of Terra Australis, convinced it held untold riches. In a way, they weren't entirely wrong. The continent they eventually found was buried not in gold, but in secrets that these old maps might have hinted at all along. Whether Mercator's southern land was inspired by lost knowledge or just the scholarly fashion of his day, his map remains a mirror held up to history's blind spots, reflecting how much we pretend to know and how much we've forgotten. While European maps like Piri Reis and Mercator dominate the Antarctica debate, they weren't the only cultures sketching enigmatic southern lands. Half a world away, Chinese and Arab cartographers were piecing together their own visions of the globe, and some of their work raises equally tantalizing questions. Take the Kangnido map created in Korea in 1402. This sprawling, colorful chart merges Chinese, Islamic, and even fragmentary European geography into a single breathtaking panorama. At its southern edge lies a vast, unnamed landmass labeled simply as the Region of Darkness. Could this be another fleeting glimpse of Antarctica, or just another case of theoretical geography filling the blanks? The Kangnido's southern continent lacks the precise coastlines of Piri Reis or Oronteus Finaeus, but its sheer size is striking. Unlike European maps that often depicted Terra Australis as a slender balancing act, this land sprawls across the bottom third of the map, dwarfing even Africa. Some researchers argue it might represent a garbled fusion of Australia and Antarctica, based on rumors from Arab traders who sailed the Indian Ocean. Others see echoes of ancient Chinese legends about Liu, a mythical southern realm mentioned in texts as early as the Tang dynasty. But here's what's fascinating. Chinese explorer Zheng He's massive treasure fleets reportedly sailed as far as East Africa in the early 1400s. Could they have ventured farther south, bringing back whispers of icy shores? Arab cartographers add another layer to the puzzle. Scholars like Al-Idrisi, whose 12th century tabula Rogeriana was one of the medieval world's most advanced maps, wrote of lands beyond the Sea of Darkness, where the sun's rays are weak. His descriptions align oddly well with Antarctic conditions, though he likely never traveled there himself. Even more intriguing are the accounts of Ibn Battuta, the legendary Moroccan traveler who chronicled a 14th century voyage to what he called the Green Land far south of Arabia. Modern historians dismiss this as a probable misidentification of the Maldives, but the name lingers like a ghost. Why Green Land for a place we now know as frozen desert? The challenge with these Eastern maps lies in their philosophical underpinnings. Unlike European cartography, which increasingly prized empirical observation, Chinese and Arab traditions often blended science with cosmology. The Kangnido map, for instance, isn't just geography, it's a symbolic representation of the Confucian worldview, where lands beyond China's tributary system fade into abstraction. Arab maps, meanwhile, frequently placed south at the top, flipping modern conventions and making direct comparisons even trickier. Yet dismissing these maps as purely symbolic risks missing the forest for the trees. Arabic navigational manuals like the 15th century Book of Curiosities describe advanced astronomical techniques that could pinpoint latitude with remarkable accuracy. Chinese records from the Ming Dynasty mention ice mountains sighted by sailors near the Malacca Strait, possibly icebergs carved from Antarctic waters. These fragments suggest that even if Eastern maps didn't chart Antarctica directly, they might preserve shards of real exploration now lost to history. The most compelling argument for cross-cultural knowledge comes from the unexpected overlaps. When Portuguese explorers reached the Indian Ocean in the late 1400s, they relied heavily on Arab pilots and stolen maps. Could some whisper of a southern continent have traveled along these trade routes, seeping into both Eastern and Western cartography? It's not impossible after all. The Kangnido map itself incorporates Islamic geography, proving ideas could cross continents long before the age of global exploration. Whether these maps show Antarctica or simply humanity's timeless urge to name the unknown, they remind us that the mystery of the southern continent wasn't just a European obsession. From Beijing to Baghdad, the blank spaces on parchment called out to be filled sometimes with hard-won knowledge, sometimes with educated guesses, and sometimes with legends that just might hold a kernel of truth. In the end, the Cognito and its counterparts aren't just artifacts. They're invitations to wonder how much our ancestors really knew and how much we've yet to rediscover. The Oronteus Finaeus map doesn't just hint at Antarctica, it practically shouts its secrets for those who know where to look. Zoom in on the intricate lines of this 1531 masterpiece, and you'll spot something extraordinary. A network of rivers snaking through valleys, mountain ranges rising in jagged peaks, and coastlines that curve with unsettling familiarity. These aren't random scribbles. Modern sonar scans reveal these features buried beneath Antarctica's ice, invisible to the naked eye for millennia. So how did a French scholar, working centuries before satellite imaging or ice-penetrating radar, capture details that would remain hidden until the Cold War era? Start with the mountains. Phineus's map shows a central range splitting the continent, eerily mirroring the transantarctic mountains that divide East and West Antarctica today. Even more striking are the rivers, dozens of them, flowing toward the coast in patterns that align with subglacial valleys now mapped by scientists. These aren't vague similarities. The Wilkes Land Basin, a massive depression beneath the ice, appears on the map as a series of converging waterways. The Beardmore Glacier, one of Antarctica's largest, is suggested by a deep inlet that matches its real-world location. Coincidence can't explain this level of detail. Then there's the climate puzzle. Phineus labeled parts of this southern land as temperate, with notes describing habitable regions, a far cry from the frozen desert we know. This has led some researchers to speculate that his sources might date back to a warmer epoch, when Antarctica's coasts could have been ice-free. Geological evidence confirms the continent was once lush, but that was tens of millions of years before humans existed. Unless, of course, Phineus had access to records from a civilization that witnessed Antarctica in a different state, a possibility that sends shivers down the spines of mainstream historians. Critics counter that Phineus might have been stitching together vague sailor accounts or misinterpreting descriptions of South America's rugged southern tip. But here's the rub. The map's errors don't align with South American geography. The river systems Phineus drew have no counterpart in Patagonia, yet they match Antarctica's hidden topography with uncanny precision. Even his placement of the continent, offset slightly from the South Pole, could reflect ancient understanding of continental drift, a concept not formalized until the 20th century. The most haunting question isn't just how Phineus got it right, it's where his knowledge came from. He claimed to have compiled his map from Greek, Roman, and Arabic sources, some predating the Common Era. Could fragments of Alexander the Great's lost library have contained Antarctic charts, or were medieval Arab traders who sailed as far as Mozambique, privy to southern secrets from indigenous cultures? The map's labels, written in Latin but peppered with Arabic place names, suggest a melting pot of influences. Yet for all its mysteries, the Phineus map isn't flawless. Some coastlines bulge unnaturally, and a few mountain ranges appear where none exist today. But these mistakes might hold clues. If the map blends multiple sources, some accurate, others distorted by centuries of copying, the errors could be like static in a broadcast, obscuring a signal from the distant past. What emerges isn't just a map, but a palimpsest of human curiosity, where every line whispers the same tantalizing question: how much did our ancestors really know, and why did we forget? Imagine a single building holding the sum of human knowledge, every star chart, every explorer's log, every map drawn by ancient hands. That was the Library of Alexandria, a beacon of learning that stood for centuries before vanishing in flames. Among its countless lost treasures, some theorists argue, could have been the very maps that inspired Piri Reis and Oronteus Finaeus. The idea isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. We know the library housed works from across the known world: Greek astronomy, Egyptian medicine, even navigational records from Phoenician sailors who circled Africa 2,000 years before Vasco da Gama. If any institution might have preserved fragments of Antarctic exploration, it would have been this one. Consider the timeline. The library's peak coincided with eras of astonishing maritime achievement. The Ptolemaic dynasty funded expeditions down the Red Sea, and accounts like the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea describe trade routes stretching to India and beyond. Could one of these voyages have pushed farther south, charting lands beyond the ice? Historians like Strabo wrote of antipodes, a southern counterbalance to the northern world, while Ptolemy's geography hinted at a vast terra incognita at the bottom of the globe. These weren't just myths, they were hypotheses based on observable patterns in geography. If the library held more detailed records, now lost, they might explain the precision of later maps. The destruction of the library wasn't a single event but a slow unraveling. Julius Caesar's siege in 48 BCE reportedly started a fire that consumed part of its collection. Christian riots in the 4th century targeted pagan knowledge, and by the time Muslim armies arrived in the 7th century, the library was a shadow of itself. With each disaster, untold scrolls vanished, including, perhaps, those describing lands we've only rediscovered in modern times. The irony is painful. The same institution that might have held proof of ancient Antarctic exploration was erased before it could pass that knowledge forward. But here's the twist: not everything was lost. Scholars like Hypatia and her father Theon salvaged texts, copying them for private collections. Byzantine monasteries later preserved some works, and Arab translators like Ibn al-Haytham safeguarded others during the Islamic Golden Age. Could slivers of Antarctic cartography have slipped through these cracks? The Piri Reis maps references to the maps of Alexandria suggest at least some geographical records survived the library's fall, even if indirectly. The real tragedy isn't just what burned, it's what might have been copied inaccurately, reinterpreted through generations of scribes until only ghostly traces remained. Skeptics, of course, dismiss this as wishful thinking. They argue that if Antarctic maps existed in antiquity, we'd find echoes in surviving texts. Yet consider this: the library's contents were so vast that even partial catalogues mention works like The Circumnavigation of Africa by Hanno the Navigator, an account now known only through second-hand summaries. How many other voyages were documented only to vanish without a trace? The truth may lie somewhere between legend and history, in the gaps where fire and time have left us guessing. What makes the Alexandria theory so compelling isn't just the possibility of lost maps, it's the reminder of how fragile knowledge can be. A single spark, a moment of chaos, and centuries of discovery can vanish. Those phantom coastlines on Renaissance maps might be more than oddities. They could be the last whispers of a library that once held the world's secrets. And if that's true, the real mystery isn't whether ancient explorers reached Antarctica, it's how much else they knew that we'll never rediscover. Piri Reis didn't just draw his famous map, he left behind clues about how he made it. In his own handwritten notes, he claimed to have compiled information from no fewer than 20 older sources, some allegedly dating back to the era of Alexander the Great. That's a staggering claim, one that sends historians scrambling for answers. Were these sources real, meticulously preserved documents from antiquity, or was Reis exaggerating to lend his work more prestige? To unravel this, we need to step into the world of 16th century cartography, where maps were as much about politics as they were about geography. Reis's most revealing note mentions using the maps of the Western lands drawn in the time of Alexander. At first glance, that seems impossible. Alexander's empire crumbled centuries before, and most of its records were lost. But here's where it gets interesting. The Library of Alexandria, as we've discussed, housed countless texts from across the ancient world, including geographical works. While the library itself was destroyed, fragments of its knowledge could have survived in scattered copies or through Arab scholars who preserved Greek texts during the Middle Ages. Reis, an Ottoman admiral with access to captured Spanish and Portuguese charts, might have stumbled upon these remnants without even realizing their true age. Then there's the question of embellishment. In Reis's time, mapmaking wasn't just science, it was storytelling. Cartographers often inflated their sources to impress patrons or outdo rivals. Claiming lineage from Alexander's era would have given Reis's map an air of ancient authority, something highly valued in the cutthroat world of Renaissance exploration. But skeptics point out that no surviving maps from Alexander's time show anything resembling Antarctica, nor do any classical texts describe such a southern continent. If Reis's sources were real, they vanished without a trace. Yet there's a tantalizing middle ground. Some researchers suggest Reis might have been working from medieval copies of much older materials, distorted through centuries of translation and recopying. Think of it like a game of telephone where the original message, say, a Greek geographer's account of a southern land, gets garbled over time until it's unrecognizable. By Reis's era, these fragments could have been mislabeled, merged with other myths, or even misattributed to famous figures like Alexander to boost their credibility. The strongest evidence for Reis's honesty comes from the map itself. The precision of certain coastlines, like the bulge of Brazil and the eerie outline of Antarctica's Queen Maud Land, suggests he wasn't just doodling from imagination. If his sources were purely fictional, how did they get so many details right? On the other hand, the map's glaring errors, like the merging of South America with Antarctica, hint at the limits of his knowledge. Maybe Reis wasn't lying about his sources, but working with incomplete or corrupted versions of once accurate charts. What's undeniable is this: Reis's notes open a door to a shadowy corridor of history, where ancient knowledge might have flickered briefly before disappearing. Whether he had genuine fragments of Alexander's lost geography or simply borrowed the prestige of a legendary name, his map forces us to confront how much of the past remains hidden, not in the ground, but in the ink-stained margins of forgotten manuscripts. The real mystery isn't just what Reis knew, but how many other secrets might still be waiting in the archives, overlooked or misunderstood. Glacial cycles paint a picture of Antarctica that's almost unrecognizable today. Around 55 million years ago, fossil records show this now frozen continent was a lush, temperate paradise complete with forests, rivers, and even mammals roaming its shores. But here's the twist: by the time humans evolved, Antarctica had already been locked in ice for millions of years. So how does this square with theories of ancient exploration? The key might lie in the planet's more recent climate fluctuations, which could have opened brief windows for human discovery. Take the last interglacial period, roughly 125,000 years ago. Global temperatures rose enough to shrink polar ice caps, possibly exposing slivers of Antarctica's coastline. While Homo sapiens were just beginning to migrate out of Africa, this warm spell wouldn't have left enough time for advanced civilizations to emerge and chart the continent. Fast forward to the Holocene epoch, though, and the puzzle gets more intriguing. Between 6,000 and 9,000 years ago, a climatic optimum warmed the Southern Ocean. Could early seafarers have glimpsed Antarctic shores during this time? The problem is evidence. Even if coastal ice briefly receded, no archaeological traces, no tools, no campfires, no ship remnants have ever been found to suggest human presence. That absence hasn't stopped speculation. Some researchers point to the mysterious abandonment of coastal settlements in South America around 4,000 years ago, coinciding with a period of rising sea levels. Could these cultures have fled south, chasing myths of habitable lands beyond the ice? Oral traditions among the Yagan people of Tierra del Fuego speak of a great white land to the south, accessible when the sea slept. These stories could describe icebergs or glacial shelves, but they've fueled theories that fragmentary knowledge of Antarctica survived in indigenous lore. Then there's the wild card, Antarctica's volcanic activity. Mount Erebus, the southernmost active volcano, spews heat year-round, creating microclimates where ice retreats. Steam vents near the Ross Ice Shelf form vast underground caves, some with temperatures hovering near freezing, still brutal, but survivable with knowledge of geothermal hotspots. If ancient explorers did reach Antarctica, these oases of relative warmth might have been their only refuge. The Maori legend of Ui Tirangara, a 7th century navigator who allegedly sailed into frozen ocean realms, could hint at such fleeting contact. But the skeptics have a compelling rebuttal: technology. Even during warm spells, reaching Antarctica would have required seafaring capabilities beyond any known ancient culture. The Southern Ocean's ferocious currents and rogue waves make the Drake Passage one of the most treacherous waterways on Earth, hardly navigable without reinforced ships and precise instruments. Polynesian voyagers, arguably history's greatest premodern sailors, never ventured farther south than subantarctic islands like the Auckland or Campbell groups. Without metal tools to weather iceberg collisions or reliable ways to store fresh water, an Antarctic expedition would have been tantamount to suicide. Yet history loves outliers. The Norse settlement of Greenland during the medieval warm period proves humans could adapt to extreme cold when motivated. And if the Inuit thrived in the Arctic, why couldn't another culture have probed the southern latitudes? The difference, of course, is proof. Greenland's ruins are tangible. Antarctica's hypothetical visitors leave no trace. Perhaps the strongest argument isn't about possibility, but probability. With glacial cycles measured in millennia and human civilizations' rise counted in centuries, the odds of these timelines overlapping meaningfully seem vanishingly slim. Still, the maps linger their strange accuracy, a whisper from the past. Maybe they're not records of Antarctic exploration, but of something equally profound: humanity's relentless drive to name the unknown, even when the only ink at hand is speculation. The ice, after all, keeps its secrets longer than parchment, and until we find a shipwreck frozen in time or a tool buried in the permafrost, the question remains open, as vast and uncharted as the continent itself. The legend of Hyperborea whispers through ancient texts like a ghost, a land beyond the north wind where the sun never set, inhabited by a race of giants or godlike beings. Greek writers like Pindar described it as a paradise of eternal spring, untouched by disease or old age. But here's where the plot thickens. Over centuries, Hyperborea's location shifted in myth, sometimes placed in the Arctic, other times drifting southward. Could this elusive utopia have been Antarctica in disguise? The theory hinges on a radical reinterpretation of old maps and fragmented lore, suggesting that north and south might have been confused or symbolically reversed in ancient cosmologies. Take the work of 16th century cartographer Gerardus Mercator, who famously placed Hyperborea at the North Pole as a ring-shaped continent surrounding a magnetic mountain. But flip that image upside down and suddenly, the geography starts to echo Antarctica's icy expanse. Even stranger, Mercator's sources reportedly included a lost text called the Inventio Fortunata, which described the pole as a black rock, encircled by whirlpools, details that some argue could mirror Antarctic volcanic activity or the churning currents of the Southern Ocean. Was this a case of misunderstood directions where beyond the north actually meant beneath the south? Then there's the biological angle. Hyperborean myths often mention golden apples and giant trees flora that couldn't survive the Arctic tundra. But fossil evidence shows Antarctica once hosted temperate forests, complete with species like the southern beech. Could these ancient ecosystems have inspired the legends? Proponents of the theory point to the Piri Reis maps notes about a warm southern land, or the Oronteus Finaeus maps river valleys, as possible echoes of a greener Antarctica preserved in myth. Skeptics, though, aren't convinced. They argue that Hyperborea's shifting location is a hallmark of symbolic geography, not a real place. In Greek thought, beyond the north wind likely meant the edge of the known world, a metaphysical boundary rather than a physical one. The giant trees and eternal spring, poetic metaphors for a land outside time, not a geological survey. Even Mercator's map, they say, was less about accuracy and more about Renaissance fascination with symmetry and classical lore. Yet the parallels nag at the imagination. The Roman historian Tacitus wrote of a northern people called the Hyperboreans who worshipped the sun, a description that mirrors Inuit and Sami traditions. Could these accounts have been distorted reflections of indigenous knowledge about polar regions, later grafted onto Antarctic myths? Or perhaps Hyperborea was never a single place at all, but a collage of half-remembered voyages, blending Arctic and Antarctic glimpses into one celestial ideal. The most compelling counterpoint comes from chronology. If Hyperborea was Antarctica, humans would have needed to witness it during a warm epoch millions of years before our species existed. Unless, of course, the legends aren't human in origin. Some fringe theorists suggest Hyperborea might represent ancestral memory or even extraterrestrial contact, though these ideas lack any scientific footing. The simpler explanation that Hyperborea, like Atlantis, is a mirror held up to humanity's longing for a lost golden age, a blank space on the map where we project our deepest myths. Still, the possibility lingers like a half-forgotten dream. Whether Hyperborea was Antarctica, the Arctic, or nowhere at all, its legend endures because it taps into something primal, the idea that somewhere beyond the ice and darkness lies a world we once knew or think we did. And in that space between myth and map, the past keeps its most tantalizing secrets. Modern expeditions to Antarctica have uncovered puzzling anomalies that fuel the debate over ancient maps. But separating fact from fringe theory requires a careful eye. In 2018, satellite imagery revealed a peculiar, nearly symmetrical formation in East Antarctica's Wilkes Land region. Dubbed the Wilkes Land Anomaly, this massive, circular structure beneath the ice spans over 300 kilometers, with some researchers speculating it could be the remnants of an ancient impact crater or volcanic caldera. Yet conspiracy forums erupted with claims it matched Plato's descriptions of Atlantis's circular city. The truth, geologists confirm it's likely a 250 million-year-old asteroid scar far older than human civilization. But the discovery highlights how easily modern science can be twisted to fit ancient myths. Then there's the so-called Pyramid of Antarctica, a sharply angled peak near the Ellsworth Mountains that went viral in 2016. Its near-perfect triangular faces sparked wild theories about lost civilizations until glaciologists pointed out that wind erosion and glacial activity often sculpt natural pyramidal shapes in polar regions. Similar formations exist in the Arctic, like the Matterhorn-like peaks of Baffin Island. Still, the buzz around these features reveals a deeper truth. We're desperate to find validation for those enigmatic old maps, even when geology offers simpler explanations. More intriguing are the rare artifacts that defy easy categorization. In 2021, a Russian ice core drilling team reported pulling up a metallic fragment embedded in million-year-old ice. Analysis showed it was an unusual nickel-iron alloy, but the real shock came when carbon dating suggested the ice around it was only 12,000 years old, a blink in geological time. Mainstream scientists dismissed it as space debris, possibly a meteorite fragment. Yet alternative researchers pounced, noting that the alloy's composition resembled archaic smelting techniques from the Bronze Age. Could it be a tool dropped by some prehistoric explorer? The odds are astronomically low, but the mere possibility keeps the mystery alive. The most compelling recent support for ancient maps comes not from artifacts, but from technology. When researchers at the University of California compared the Buach map to subglacial topography data in 2019, they found startling overlaps, particularly in the depiction of Antarctica's underwater mountain ranges. The map's central sea, aligned loosely with the vast subglacial Lake Vostok, discovered only in the 1990s. Skeptics argue these matches are cherry-picked, but proponents counter that the probability of such accuracy by chance is vanishingly small. Yet for every tantalizing clue, there's a sobering reality check. Expeditions like the 2022 SCAR Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research survey confirmed that human activity on the continent leaves unmistakable traces: middens, tools, ship remnants. After centuries of exploration, not a single verified pre-modern artifact has been found. The silence is deafening. Perhaps the real discovery here isn't about Antarctica's past, but about our own fascination with the unknown. Those ancient maps, whether accurate or accidental, tap into something primal, the thrill of wondering if history's missing a page, and until someone uncovers a frozen shipwreck or a carved stone beneath the ice, that thrill will keep us searching. The moment you zoom in on Antarctica using Google Earth, the icy expanse transforms into a playground for conspiracy theorists and armchair archaeologists. Blurry shapes under the ice, odd geometric formations on the surface. Some claim these are the remnants of lost pyramids or even entire buried cities. One particularly infamous example is a cluster of pixelated ridges near the Ellsworth Mountains, which went viral as the Antarctica Pyramids. At first glance, the symmetry seems uncanny, the angles too precise to be natural. But before we start rewriting history books, let's pause and ask, are we seeing real structures or just the quirks of satellite imagery and our own pattern-seeking brains? Satellite glitches are a well-documented phenomenon. When images are stitched together from multiple passes, shadows, ice formations, and even data artifacts can create illusions of straight lines or perfect triangles. Take the so-called pyramid near the southern Ellsworth Range. Glaciologists point out that nunataks exposed mountain peaks surrounded by ice often erode into sharp, geometric shapes due to relentless polar winds. The Matterhorn in the Alps is a perfect example of how nature sculpts near-perfect pyramids without human help. Even the infamous Lost City of Atlantis formation, another Google Earth oddity, was later identified as a glacial moraine, its grid-like patterns the result of ice flow and sediment deposition over millennia. Then there's the issue of resolution. Google Earth's imagery varies widely across Antarctica, with some areas covered in high detail and others relying on lower quality scans. Pixelation in these lower-res zones can exaggerate edges or create artificial symmetry, turning jagged ridges into stairs or walls. In 2019, a team from the University of Cambridge tested these viral claims by overlaying the coordinates with radar topography data. The result, those pyramids were just wind-scoured slopes, their apparent symmetry a trick of perspective when viewed from directly above. But here's where it gets interesting. While most of these anomalies have mundane explanations, a few defy easy dismissal. In 2017, researchers using ground-penetrating radar near the Shackleton Range detected a series of unusual, angular reflections beneath the ice, unlike typical geological formations. Mainstream scientists argue these are likely rare mineral deposits or ice layer distortions, but the precision of the angles keeps speculation alive. Could there be a kernel of truth buried beneath centuries of ice and centuries of myth? The real lesson here isn't just about Antarctica, it's about how we see the world. Our brains are wired to find meaning in chaos, to spot faces in clouds and castles in rock formations. When that instinct collides with the allure of ancient mysteries, it's easy to mistake nature's artistry for human handiwork. Yet the persistence of these theories speaks to something deeper, our collective fascination with the idea that history might still hold grand surprises, waiting to be uncovered with the click of a mouse. Whether these Google Earth oddities are glitches or glimpses, they remind us that the most captivating mysteries often lie not in the ice, but in the stories we tell about it. Mainstream scholars have a compelling case when they argue that these ancient maps don't actually show Antarctica at all, but rather distorted versions of known continents or pure mythological constructs. The most straightforward explanation, cartographic errors. Early mapmakers didn't have satellite imagery or precise surveying tools. They relied on fragmented sailor accounts, flawed measurements, and artistic license. Take the Piri Reis map's supposed Antarctica, rotate it slightly, and the landmass aligns more closely with the eastern coast of South America, stretched and warped by the limitations of Renaissance projection techniques. Even the Oronteus Finaeus map's rivers could easily be misread descriptions of Patagonia's intricate fjords, mangled through generations of copying and translation. Then there's the glaring absence of physical evidence. If ancient civilizations had the capability to explore Antarctica, where are the shipwrecks, the tools, the settlements? Archaeologists have scoured every other continent for traces of pre-modern exploration, uncovering Viking longships in Newfoundland and Phoenician trade goods as far as Britain. Yet Antarctica remains silent, no artifacts, no carvings, no charcoal from ancient campfires. Even the most optimistic theorists can't point to a single verified artifact that predates Captain Cook's 18th century voyages. Without tangible proof, the case for ancient Antarctic exploration rests entirely on subjective interpretations of old parchment. Climate science delivers another blow to the theory. Ice core samples from Antarctica reveal uninterrupted layers of snowfall dating back millions of years, with no signs of a temperate period within human history. The continent's coasts have been locked in ice for at least 15 million years long before Homo sapiens evolved. While maps like Piri Reis describe warm southern lands, geology confirms Antarctica hasn't hosted lush forests or flowing rivers since the age of dinosaurs. Even during brief interglacial warm spells, the coastline would have remained icy and inhospitable, far from the habitable regions depicted on these controversial charts. Skeptics also highlight the psychological phenomenon of pareidolia, the human tendency to see meaningful patterns where none exist. When modern eyes study these ancient maps, are we projecting Antarctica onto them because we expect to find it? The Buach map's split continent, for instance, might not reflect knowledge of subglacial trenches, but rather a coincidence where artistic guesswork accidentally mirrored reality. After all, if you throw enough darts at a blank canvas, one or two will inevitably land close to the bullseye. perhaps the most damning rebuttal comes from the maps themselves. For every eerily accurate feature, there are glaring mistakes, phantom islands, misplaced mountain ranges, entire continents crudely stitched together. The Zeno maps Friesland, a purely fictional landmass, proves how easily errors could persist for centuries. If these cartographers had genuine access to Antarctic knowledge, why did they get so much else wrong? The inconsistencies suggest these maps weren't based on lost wisdom, but on the messy, imperfect process of piecing together a half-known world. Yet even the staunchest critics admit there's a lingering itch these explanations don't quite scratch. Why do the coincidences pile up around Antarctica specifically, and not other uncharted regions? The debate isn't just about geography, it's about how history gets written and who decides which mysteries deserve a second look. For now, mainstream science remains unmoved, but the maps keep whispering, daring us to reconsider what we think we know. Our brains are hardwired to connect the dots, to turn random shapes into familiar images, like seeing animals in clouds or a face on the surface of the moon. This phenomenon, called pareidolia, might be the silent architect behind many of the so-called Antarctic mysteries on these ancient maps. When we scrutinize the jagged coastlines of the Piri Reis or Oronteus Finaeus charts, are we genuinely spotting Antarctica, or are we imposing our modern knowledge onto vague, centuries-old sketches? The answer might lie in the way our minds fill gaps, stitching together meaning from fragments. Consider the famous Face on Mars, a rock formation photographed by Viking 1 in 1976 that at first glance appeared sculpted with human-like features. Later high-resolution images revealed it as nothing more than a trick of light and shadow. Yet for decades, the illusion captivated millions. That same psychological pull could be at work with these maps. When modern researchers overlay Renaissance charts onto satellite imagery of Antarctica, the moments where they align feel revelatory. But what about the vast stretches that don't match? Our focus naturally drifts toward the hits while glossing over the misses, a cognitive bias known as confirmation bias. We're primed to notice the coastline on the Piri Reis map that resembles Queen Maud Land, but we might overlook how the rest of the landmass contorts into geographic nonsense when compared to reality. This isn't just about geography, it's about storytelling. Humans are narrative creatures drawn to mysteries that promise to rewrite history. The allure of a lost civilization or forgotten explorers mapping Antarctica thousands of years ago is undeniably romantic. It's far more thrilling than the mundane truth that cartographers often filled blank spaces with educated guesses, blending sailor rumors, classical myths, and sheer imagination. The Buach maps split Antarctica, for instance, could be a lucky coincidence where theoretical geography accidentally mirrored reality, rather than evidence of pre-modern knowledge. After all, if you sketch enough hypothetical landmasses, one of them will eventually resemble something real. But here's where it gets tricky. Pareidolia doesn't fully explain why certain specific details, like the transantarctic mountains on the Oronteus Finaeus map, align so precisely with features buried under miles of ice. Coincidence can account for a lot, but when multiple coincidences pile up, even skeptics pause. The psychological explanation isn't a blanket dismissal. It's a reminder to approach these maps with balanced scrutiny. Are we seeing genuine traces of lost knowledge, or are we, like sailors mistaking clouds for land, projecting our desires onto the parchment? The maps themselves won't settle the debate, but understanding how our minds shape the mystery might bring us closer to the truth. Antarctica's icy expanse has long served as a blank canvas for humanity's wildest imaginings, a place where the line between reality and myth dissolves like fog over the Ross Ice Shelf. H.P. Lovecraft's 1936 novella At the Mountains of Madness didn't just borrow this mystique, it etched the continent into pop culture as a realm of cosmic horror. His tale of ancient alien ruins and frozen monstrosities beneath the ice tapped into the same unease that haunts those enigmatic old maps. What if Antarctica isn't just unexplored, but actively hiding something? Lovecraft's vision was so potent that it spawned an entire subgenre of Antarctic horror, from John Carpenter's The Thing to the eerie subterranean labs of Annihilation. These stories prey on a primal fear that the last untouched wilderness on Earth might already belong to something else. Yet the continent's cultural footprint stretches far beyond horror. Conspiracy theorists have transformed it into a modern-day Atlantis, weaving tales of secret Nazi bases, hidden pyramids, and even extraterrestrial gateways. The infamous Operation Highjumper, a 1947 U.S. military expedition, fuels these fires, with whispers that Admiral Byard wasn't just mapping ice but fleeing hostile flying craft from a hollow Earth. Never mind that Byard's actual reports mention nothing of the sort. The gaps in official narratives become fertile ground for legend. Even the Flat Earth community has co-opted Antarctica, absurdly claiming it's a giant ice wall guarding the planet's edge. What unites these theories isn't evidence, but the same allure that gripped Renaissance cartographers, the thrill of the uncharted. Literature, too, keeps circling back to Antarctica's siren call. Kim Stanley Robinson's Antarctica paints it as a fragile frontier for scientific idealism, while Claire Keegan's Antarctica uses its isolation as a metaphor for emotional desolation. Even children's media like Happy Feet can't resist framing the continent as a place of transformation where misfits find their purpose against a backdrop of glittering emptiness. This versatility speaks to Antarctica's unique power. It's both a setting and a Rorschach test, reflecting whatever fears or hopes we project onto it. Perhaps most fascinating is how these fictional and fringe portrayals loop back to real mystery. When a 2017 Russian documentary claimed to discover swastika-shaped ruins under the ice, the viral frenzy revealed how deeply pop culture primes us to see Antarctica as a puzzle box of secrets. Never mind that the shapes were clearly natural ice formations, the mere suggestion tied into decades of Nazi occult lore, from Himmler's expeditions to the New Swabia mythos. The cycle feeds itself, each new story layering onto the old, until fact and fiction become as indistinguishable as snowfall on a glacier. From Lovecraft shoggoths to Instagram conspiracy posts, Antarctica's cultural legacy proves one thing: we don't just want to explore this continent. We need it to stay mysterious, whether through novels, films, or wild YouTube deep dives. We keep rewriting Antarctica as the last place on Earth where magic or monsters might still be real. And in an era where satellites have mapped every pixel of the planet, that illusion may be the most valuable terra incognita left. The search for definitive proof that these ancient maps truly depict Antarctica hinges on two tantalizing possibilities: groundbreaking technology or the rediscovery of lost knowledge. Imagine if archaeologists could develop ultra-sensitive ice-penetrating scanners capable of detecting human-made structures buried beneath millennia of glacial buildup. Right now, tools like ground-penetrating radar can map subglacial topography, but they struggle to distinguish between natural rock formations and potential artifacts. Future advancements might change that. Perhaps quantum sensors or AI-enhanced imaging could spot the faint signature of a Bronze Age anchor or a stone tool frozen in the ice. Even more promising are developments in sediment analysis. If researchers could pinpoint layers of ice containing microscopic traces of campfire, soot, or tool-making debris, we might finally have physical evidence of ancient visitors. Then there's the paper trail. The Library of Alexandria wasn't the only repository of ancient wisdom. What if a trove of Ptolemaic sailing logs molded undiscovered in a monastic vault or Ottoman archive? In 2019, scholars uncovered a previously unknown edition of Homer's Odyssey in a palimpsest beneath a medieval prayer book. Similar surprises could await: a merchant's ledger detailing a southern voyage, or a Byzantine scholar's copied fragment of a lost Antarctic map. The recent decipherment of the Herculaneum scrolls, carbonized by Mount Vesuvius and now being read through advanced X-ray techniques, proves how much ancient writing might still be recovered. If a single document surfaced explicitly describing Antarctica's ice-free coasts, it would rewrite history overnight. But the most plausible breakthroughs might come from interdisciplinary sleuthing. Marine archaeologists could scour the seafloor near Antarctica for shipwrecks carrying distinctively old construction techniques. Geneticists might analyze sediment cores for sudden spikes in exotic pollen or microbes, hinting at a brief warm period when humans could have ventured south. Even linguistics could play a role. If scholars found recurring descriptions of a white land in disparate indigenous oral traditions, it might suggest shared ancestral memories of the continent. Of course, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. The harsh truth is that Antarctica's ice has likely erased most traces of any pre-modern exploration. Ships made of wood don't survive eons under glaciers, and stone tools would be ground to dust by shifting ice sheets, unless explorers left behind something nearly indestructible, like etched metal plaques or cave carvings protected in rare geothermal vents. We may never find definitive proof. Yet the mystery endures because it challenges our assumptions about human ingenuity. If Polynesians could navigate thousands of miles using only stars and wave patterns, who's to say another culture didn't push farther south? The maps themselves, with their uncanny flashes of accuracy, remain silent witnesses to, something. Whether that something is lost exploration, astonishing coincidence, or fragments of knowledge we no longer understand, the hunt for answers keeps pulling us back to the ice. And in science, sometimes the most important discoveries start with asking the right questions, even if the answers take centuries to find. After journeying through ancient maps, forgotten knowledge, and fiery debates, one thing is clear: the mystery of Antarctica's depiction remains unsolved. These enigmatic charts, whether fragments of lost wisdom, astonishing coincidences, or elaborate myths, force us to confront how little we truly know about humanity's past. The Piri Reis map's uncanny coastline, the Oronteus Finaeus river valleys, the Buach map's split continent, they all whisper the same tantalizing question: what if our timeline of exploration is missing entire chapters? Consider the weight of that possibility. If even one of these maps preserves genuine knowledge of Antarctica, it rewrites history. It means someone, somewhere, glimpsed this frozen realm long before Cook or Bellingshausen, perhaps during a warm epoch lost to time, or with navigational skills we've yet to rediscover. The implications ripple outward: forgotten voyages, drowned civilizations, or even cultural exchanges we can't begin to imagine. Yet the skeptic's counterargument is just as compelling. Coincidence and human ingenuity can't be underestimated. After all, Renaissance mapmakers were brilliant synthesizers, weaving sailor tales, classical texts, and educated guesses into works of art that sometimes, by sheer chance, mirrored reality. Here's where the mystery deepens. Even if these maps aren't literal charts of Antarctica, their persistence hints at something profound: humanity's relentless drive to name the unknown. From Terra Australis to Hyperborea, we've always spun stories to fill blank spaces on parchment. And in our understanding, that urge hasn't faded. Today's conspiracy theories about hidden pyramids or Nazi bases are just modern echoes of the same impulse that led Mercator to sketch a symmetrical southern continent. The difference: we now have satellites and sonar to test these ideas, yet the allure of the unexplained endures. So where does that leave us? Perhaps the truth lies not in proving or disproving these maps, but in what they reveal about our relationship with history. They remind us that knowledge is fragile, that empires rise and burn libraries, that oral traditions fade like footprints in snow. Whether these charts are accurate or not, they've done their job. They've made us look closer, dig deeper, and question the stories we take for granted. Now it's your turn to weigh in. Do these maps hold fragments of lost exploration, or are we seeing patterns where none exist? Could Antarctica's secrets still lie buried, not just under ice, but in some overlooked manuscript or ruin? Drop your theories in the comments, and if you're craving more deep dives into history's shadowy corners, hit that subscribe button. The past isn't finished surprising us